If there is one mechanic that considered to be one of the most successful in the Vanguard history, then I would straight up and say Stride is by far one of the most successful mechanic, being able to last for 3 years straight with it being the main mechanic, and its presence over time in premium is really game bending to an extent. And recently we have just received Stride Deckset in the D standard for Chronojet Dragon deck, and after playtesting it on the stream itself, which you guys can check out the VOD, I want to have a proper talk about it and what I think about Stride coming back to the standard and what it will be in the future. So if you guys enjoy this kind of content, consider like, share and subscribe. I edit my manga content semi-regularly, as often as I can, so any support is greatly appreciated. So just do whatever you need to do, just as a typical YouTube channel thing. And without further ado, let's get into it. So let's start off talking about the main mechanic of the deck itself, and that is Stride. This is a good mechanic to be introduced into the D format, and surprisingly enough, the answer to that is a resounding yes, and for a good reason. You see, in overdress format, one of the biggest focus of the game itself is to see whether who going first, because if you're going first, you get a lot more advantage, especially within the decks like the Grade 4 deck and most of the deck, as you can Persona ride one turn earlier, and that's a huge advantage that you're willing to sacrifice over not being able to draw 2 cards at the start of the game. And because of that, there is not many deck that can essentially just rush going second immediately, and because of that, there is not a lot of deck that can go second immediately. There is a few, but they are very minor and usually relies on the deck itself. So it's the deck mechanic itself that allow you to do that, not the main mechanic that is shared amongst different decks and everything. Stride is a mechanic that essentially very prefers the player to go second, and because of that, it's eventually balance out the need of overdress that need to go first with the Stride mechanic. Of course, Stride does have its own issue because of the fact that the decks do have to go second, and it does take a while for some of the deck to get up to the power level that some of the deck can just reach within turn 3, but it is a good mechanic to step in nonetheless. Do understand that this is based on the Chronojet deck only, so when Messiah deck come out in 2023, things might change, so I might come back to this topic after this video came out and everything. And speaking of Stride in D format, you can't talk Stride without talking about this brand new mechanic, and that is Crest. And Crest mechanic itself has its own good and its own bad based on the Chronojet deck set. The good part is the fact that it essentially allows you to have a different playstyle, as we already talked about earlier. And not only that, it does have a very powerful effect that is heavily related to the crest that it tied to. So for an instance, Chronojet Dragon crest has ability to turn a rear guard grade 3 or greater to grade 0, allow it to be time lead easier, and also it has abilities akin to the Persona ride, giving more power the more G-Zone face up you have, which essentially just makes Chronojet become quite a strong deck the later it goes into the game. Of course, Crest does have its own restriction, being forcing to ride a specific unit only means that you don't really have a lot of option building the deck into, and sometimes it can have an effect on the gameplay itself. For example, Soul. Like, let's be real here, without Falcate, Gigi from the Stride Deckset for Chronojet is pretty damn useless.
Emotional damage!
But I do see a heavy potential if we're gonna get more Stride Deckset in the future, as we already confirmed with the Messiah. I hope to see more interesting Crest effect as the time goes by, and as like I mentioned before, we need to see what does the other decks do with the Stride mechanic and the Crest mechanic, then we can make a proper judgment. So now that we have talked about the new mechanic that they reintroduced into the game and the new one, does the Chronojet Stride deck set itself good? And the answer to that is a resounding yes. I'm drawing a lot of similarities with the Legend deck from the G era. So for those who don't know, I'm talking about the Blaster Dark Diablo, Blaster Blade Exceed, and the Dragon Overlord Legend. Those few cards that came out like as the deck set. It's the kind of deck that you can immediately jump into playing it, but you do need to tweak it a little to make it a little bit more consistent. Like for example, the Falcate and the Gigi problem I mentioned earlier. Falcate was the solution to make Gigi consistent, And Gigi has quite a strong effect, but kind of need 4K to really facilitate everything, or the unit that does soul charge for free. The only gripe I have with the Stride deck itself is just the accessories. Okay, this is a Megane post recording here, and as I was editing this video, I watched the different fight Chris, the unboxing video of that Stride deck set, and I found that there are plus and minus onto the accessory that they give. Like the top loader is really cool, and I just realized from that video itself that it is called top loader. And there is this acrylic coin that you can just paste the sticker on. That's the one that I feel like a bit unnecessary and extra, because you can make those for very cheap, and you can make a lot of those. So in my opinion, there are some accessories that are very unnecessary, but there are quite a good number of accessories that are really good. Like, I was wondering why don't they just give the sleeve for the deck itself, you know, just to make the top loader actually worth it, because you can't just put the blank card into the top loader and call it a day like that. In my honest opinion, if you are a player who want to get into D format, or a returnee, or someone who want to play Chrono Jet or a Strider deck, then this is a deck for you. But if you are active player who already played for the longest time, this might not be the product for you, but it heavily depends on what you really prioritize when you're playing Vanguard. And that is pretty much it for today. It's gonna be on the shorter side, of course, but what do you guys think of the Stride Deckset and Stride mechanic returning to the format in itself? Do leave down in the comments below. And yeah, that's all I have for today. Take care of yourself, and this is McMegane signing out.